Welcome to All Home Care Matters, the show where we discuss all things home care, with discussions on important age-related matters and topics. Brought to you by Enriched Life Home Care Services, the #1 rated home care provider in Michigan by Top Rated Local.
Hello, and welcome back to All Home Care Matters. If this is your first time visiting us here at the show, we want to say thank you for taking time out to be with us today. We appreciate how valuable everyone's time is, and that's why we try and make each episode here at All Home Care Matters something that will hopefully matter to you. Today, I am honored to welcome the family and the team behind Activity Connection, Nancy Ewald, Doug Ewald, and Bob Ewald. Welcome, guys. How are you today?
Good.
We're fine.
I think.
We're out here on our lanai. I never heard of a lanai until I moved to Florida. To me, it was a screened-in porch. But we're between two ferns, but actually it's a palm and a yucca plant.
Wonderful. Well, we're here in chilly Michigan where it's spring, but nobody told us the weather, so we're still kind of dealing with some coldness, but eventually the green and colors will show, right? Well, welcome. I introduced you and your son Doug Ewald as the founders of Activity Connection. But Nancy, I want to kind of start at the beginning. How did you first get into the senior care space, and what was the moment that told you this work really matters?
Well, my background is actually, my degree is in medical technology, and I had a master's in allied education. So my first career was working in a hospital lab with pipettes and Bunsen burners. But then I got, like many other people, I got into the profession actually with a personal experience working with seniors. And it was our first home. And on one side, we had an elderly couple that didn't have any children. On the other side, we had two sisters who didn't have any children, and none of them had any family close by. And so we became very close. They took care of our kids, babysat our kids, and so forth. So over the years, as they had to give up their homes, as they had to move into healthcare, as they had to move into assisted living and so forth, I've kind of followed them along that whole path. And, one thing and that's when I really fell in love with working with seniors. And one thing that I really noticed along the way was that one story sticks in my mind in particular. Florence was sitting in her room, and across the way was a woman who always sat in her wheelchair right in the doorway. And the nurse's aide would come in and put on her slippers, and as soon as the person would disappear, why, she'd kick them off. And so one day I went over to her and I said, would you like me to put on your slippers? And she said, yeah, that'd be great. A couple of days later, I was going down to the nurse's station to get some ice cream for Florence. And so I said to the woman, I said, would you like some ice cream? She said, yes, chocolate, please. So I went down to the nurse's station and I said, can I have ice cream for Florence and also for Mrs. So-and-so across the hall? And they said, oh, you must mean somebody else. She doesn't talk. She's catatonic. She doesn't talk to us. She doesn't speak to us at all. And I thought, well, she speaks to me. So I think at that point, and I remember that story so well, it kind of occurred to me that a lot of times it's how you're doing something and not what you're doing that really matters. And so that kind of influenced my thinking along the way. So when it was time, when the kids were going back to school, it was time for me to kind of get back to work. I just couldn't imagine going back into the laboratory because things had changed so much over those years, where you would just do the pipette experiment and you'd see the reaction all by yourself. It had gone from that to sitting in a room. We called it Ziggy. The whole thing was a computer. It was when hospital blood tests and things like that became very automated. And so I said, I don't think I really want to go back to that. And so I was looking in the newspaper and I saw an ad for an activity assistant that was at a full service community just down the street. So I said to Bob, I think I'll apply for that activity assistant job. I had to go through 3 interviews for this minimum wage job, but I finally did get the job. And then shortly thereafter, the person who was in charge of the whole community had to leave, and I was put in charge of the community. So that's how I really got into the profession. And it's what I learned during those years, being an activity director in a full service, that really formed the basis, I think, for what Activity Connection became. What I was seeing was that, first of all, it was very addicting. Um, and Doug can attest to this. I did a lot of preparations at home. Um, I also realized that there were different strokes for different folks.
Right.
Everybody didn't want the same thing. Getting everybody to every activity wasn't the same thing. And that also, I tried to push the envelope that there was a lot more potential than people could realize. And so I have some wonderful stories of how successful some of the programs that I started were. And so that's kind of how I got into the field.
Wonderful. Before we go on, talking about Florence and, the comparison you make, not everyone wants the same thing. It's kind of like her and the ice cream. Her roommate might have wanted vanilla ice cream. Everybody has their own preference and things that, really speak to them. You have had a tremendously long and successful career, Nancy, before starting Activity Connection. There must have been something inside of you that really felt missing or lacking. What gaps or frustrations were you wanting to change, and did you see needed to be changed?
Well, yeah. What I was seeing, and later on, after I left this community because Bob was transferred, I took a position with Marriott Senior Living as a national director. But what I really saw was there was always lip service to, we want great programs. We want you out on the floor all the time working with residents. But the companies would not be willing to put in the money or the staff in order to make that happen. So what would happen is the activity director, wanting to please everybody because they were the most popular person in the community, they would do a lot of this work on their own. So they were overworked, they were stressed. The turnover in the field was great. And so those are the things that I saw that I thought something like Activity Connection as a website could solve.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I know with our company, we go all over Michigan, and we know the activity directors personally. We go in and do activities, nothing on the scale that I'm sure that you experienced, but we would have lunch with Elvis and bring in an Elvis impersonator, play silly bingo, do fun auctions and use play money. But we would go to the dollar store and Target and Walmart and buy bags of goodies, and we would auction them off. We didn't accept any compensation for that. We enjoyed doing it. But even more importantly, so is the activity directors greatly appreciated it, because they would say, we would love to pay you guys. Well, that's not the business we're in. We're in home care. We're doing this because we want to. And they said, we just don't have a budget. And one of the things that should be the most important part of a community would be the activities and the stimulation for the residents. So when you first dreamed up Activity Connection, what was that spark? What was that moment that told you, Nancy, this is needed? We have to do this.
Well, it was in 1997 and Bob got transferred. So I had to leave this job that I just loved. And so it was at that time, and maybe Doug can tell you how we kind of came up with the idea. Doug was really the spark that got me to do this. So he was in college at the time.
Mhm.
And Doug, maybe you want to explain what we decided to do.
So
Oh,
yeah,
and it was at the time when you would hook up to the internet with ka-chung, ka-chung, ka-chung. So this was many years ago, right, Doug?
yeah, the beginnings of Activity Connection. This would have been 1999 was when we first went online. So this was definitely in the dial-up modem era, the AOL era. And I was in college at this point. I grew up watching my mom, Nancy, as an activity director, working in the field, doing these things at home. I go off to college and I'm there as a art student at Indiana University. And at that time at IU, as anywhere else, they had a graphics design department within the art department. And that's where all the nice Mac computers were. I was always good at computers. I always had kind of the computer backgrounds. And so when I was in college, I took a few graphic design classes. And this was before there were actual programs in web design and web building. And if you wanted to learn how to build a web page, you went to the graphic design department at schools. So that's where I learned to build web pages as an art student at college. That's where you would go to learn web design back in 1999 was you would be an art student, believe it or not. And so I, at that point, knew how to build a web page. I was toying around with them. I would play around with things. And I knew that Nancy had all of these ideas that she would constantly talk about. And, we kind of together put these two things that we knew how to do. I knew how to build the web page. I knew how to run it. I knew how to do kind of the technical service back end. Nancy knew how to build the content for it, knew what people would love to do, had all these great ideas that she wanted to share with the kind of wider activity director community. Knew that people would like, that people would enjoy. So, yeah, we essentially teamed up and, yeah, started the website in 1999.
It's incredible.
Yeah.
Nancy, go ahead, Nancy.
Oh, I just wanted to say, Doug, could you tell them about our first design?
The first design speaks a little bit to the time because, we had a lot of people tell us that, no activity director is ever going to have a computer. They're never going to pay for a computer in an activity director's office. They're never going to have internet at any of these homes. Print magazines are where it's at, et cetera, et cetera. So we needed a way to tell people that we were a website. We wanted people to understand that when they saw Activity Connection, we were a website and not a print magazine. And so our first logo was a power cord.
Wow.
Essentially, incorporated a power cord to convey to people that you needed to plug in, that this was something you needed to connect to, was the, college level graphic designer connection that I would make. And so, yeah, it was a power cord. So that was our first logo, was this purple power cord to kind of tell people, convey the message that we were an online company as compared to all the print publications. So, yeah.
Yeah.
And an interesting story is that a resident actually named the website. I was having a lunch with one of my favorite residents, and I was trying to explain this new thing that we were going to be doing. And she said, well, I said, I don't know what to call it. And I said, you have to connect your computer to the internet and so forth. She said, oh, well, call it Activity Connection. So it was really a resident who named the website. And our first website was a Monopoly board that you would go around all the different categories around the Monopoly board. Right, Doug?
Right. It was very kind of gamified.
Right.
So you would go around and.
That's neat. So Nancy, you and Doug are working on this website. You have the content, he has the creativity to make it a reality. Did you ever question if it would work?
No, I thought it would work right from the very beginning because as Doug said, everybody thought, oh, activity directors will never have a computer. And for a long time, they didn't. Companies would not buy them for the activity department. But I knew from my experience working at Summer Trace, when did I do most of my work? I did most of my work at home. So I knew people were getting home computers, personal computers. So activity directors at first used Activity Connection from their home computers.
Wow. What kept you going? Because I'm sure in the early stages, I'm thinking back to my grandparents, right? They're both passed, but I would spend my summers with them growing up, southern Indiana, just outside of Louisville. And my grandparents never owned a computer. They still had the rotary dial phone. Getting cable. I remember one summer when they got cable for the first time. What a revolutionary experience that was. But my grandmother, later on, I was probably in my late teens. I had gotten my first computer when I was about 10. It was an old Tandy 1000 from Radio Shack, if anybody remembers those. And my grandma said, she goes, at one time here in the future, every home, you're going to have a computer in order to function. Every home will have one. It'll just be a necessity like your refrigerator and your oven. And sure enough, I mean, she was right. She never owned one, but so I can imagine when you're trying to explain to people in those early days, it's just, I mean, it's not an easy explanation, right? What kept you going?
I'll let Bob address that as to how we got started.
I did want to mention that this was the 90s and everything was .com, as pets.com. If you wanted to be successful as a business and have pizzazz, you added .com to your name. So our legal name is activityconnection.com, even though now we go as Activity Connection because we kind of like that, the fireworks that .com at that time brought to us. So
yeah, it was definitely the era pre.com burst. So if people can remember that time, there was a feeding frenzy for everybody to have a website. Every company, there was just .com was everywhere. So it was quite the thing to have. And yeah, we just had a feeling that it could be something
and it was free. It was free, and a lot of people were using it. So
we could keep an eye on the traffic. So we knew that there were people coming to the website, and we had a product that we sold. There was a physical bingo box that was like electronic, and people would press a button and it would call out some bingo numbers that Nancy had found, and we managed to get a hold of a wholesaler of them that was going out of business.
Wow.
And for a couple years, I think Nancy and Bob's garage was half filled and basement was half filled with these bingo boxes that we would sell to kind of help pay for, kind of the nominal cost of the server and a couple other little expenses of going to conventions to talk about it and things like that. I
remember we had a garage full of bingo boxes, and every day we'd have a few sales, and it was kind of laborious to take them down to the post office and get them shipped off. And our supply slowly decreased, and we got to the point where we can't get this product anymore. And what are we going to do? And Nancy and Doug made the decision we got to move to a subscriber-based website, something with a fee, so we can add more content, start hiring one or two people. And that was in October of 2023.
Or 2003.
Doug had to work to build up the site. How are we going to process credit cards, all these details? And we had to have enough content to handle 1 or 2 or 3 months. I was working, of course, with a large company at that time in a finance position, and I didn't really go with Activity Connection on a full-time basis for about a year and a half. And I looked at what I was doing and what Nancy and Doug was doing. I said, they're having a lot more fun than I am. So I finally said, okay, I'm going to retire from this position and go in Activity Connection full-time. I never had any regrets. It was much more fun, even though we're working more hours and more rewarding. And also, I thought we were doing something that was worthwhile.
Yeah, absolutely.
But when Doug and I decided that we needed to go to membership, we needed some seed money. So I went to Bob, remember?
Mm-hmm.
And what did you say?
At that time, Nancy had just left her job. We had moved to Cincinnati, and I thought one thing, she needs to keep busy. And so I said, okay, $800. That'll keep her busy for a couple months. And she was always at the computer. And that's when she built her content, and we've never had to borrow any money since.
Yeah, but you thought, well, that money's.
Yeah, I thought that money's gone.
That money's gone.
That's a great story. You know,
I would say this was long enough ago that my recollection was that to register the website cost $75, and I had to actually mail a physical check in to a company to get it registered. It was that long ago, and I got a physical receipt in the mail, like a piece of paper in the mail that I still have. So
That you still have,
yeah.
And he still has a bingo box, right?
Yeah.
Which we sold for
$14.95.
We're not even sure, but
I think we made $5.
you now can, we made $5 a box on it, and they're now on eBay for $155.
wow.
So we should have kept some.
That brings us up to 2003, where we decided to, Nancy and I decided to go full-time with Activity Connection, switch it over to a paid subscription model membership site, which was pretty uncommon anywhere at that time. We had around, if I recall, around 3,000 active users, daily users, before we made that switch. And a lot of them stuck with us through that switch, which was really encouraging.
Yeah.
Kind of gave us that green light to really go all in with Activity Connection. And a number of them have been with us even since then.
That's incredible.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry, I'm interrupting, I know, but I get these thoughts. I do remember we started in October, charging in October that year. By December that year, we had 300 members in just those 3 months. So those people, but the response that we were getting from a lot of people was, oh, gee, how dare you charge for seniors? Everything should be volunteer and this kind of thing. And so there were some people that were really upset that we were charging, even though it was a really nominal fee. But eventually people felt it was worth it.
You know, Nancy, you were obviously very ahead of your time, you know, going back to those days, talking about connection, meaning, and dignity when the industry was still trying to catch up. Where did that clarity originate from for you?
You mean the clarity of? I'm not understanding.
Well, I think what he's saying is you're working actually with the seniors as an activity director. So you saw the value.
You know, you have a very deep humanity approach, in an industry where that's not always the case. Where did you get that from? Where did it originate from?
Well, again, I think it was going back to my experience with Florence and Ruth when I very early days before I got into being an activity director. But I think it really was my years being an activity director that kind of formulated my philosophy and my thinking as far as what kind of programs we needed. We needed things that were that could be presented on a very one-to-one basis. In fact, if you were to think about, well, how does activity connection fit in with home care.
Yeah.
From the very beginning, from the very inception of activity connection over half a century ago, or excuse me, quarter of a century ago. We're not that old, are we? No. We were person-centered care before that was even a thing.
Yeah.
Because we thought, because of my experience working in the field and so forth, there were several things that we realized that when we started building the site that we really wanted to do. First of all, we wanted something that could be used by anybody, that most people interact, not in large groups, but in small compatible groups. So it had to be something that one person could present to another person. That was from the very beginning. Secondly, that it was so well prepared that you didn't have to be a professional in the field to present this activity. So if I wanted to have a discussion with him about old cars, I could pull up this material on the website. I could read it with discussion questions and so forth, and it would work. So it had to be. Also, the programs had to be adult, sophisticated, but also a little bit playful. And so a lot of our programs they have a little humor in them, or they have a lot of adaptability. That was another thing, that all of the programs had to have an adaptability to them. So activity connection was built kind of on the premise of one-on-one personal attention, personal care. That we didn't like reinvent activity connection because the industry is moving really to home health and to home wellness. We didn't have to reinvent activity connection in order to do that. I know that working with my own father, who's now passed away, but I used activity connection all the time. He liked to do Jeopardy shows, and we had a Jeopardy program. He loved to tell jokes, dirty jokes, but he loved to tell jokes. So we have a whole humor section on the website. I would help him with simple exercises that I got off of activity connection. And it wasn't just my experience. A lot of our employees also had that very similar experience of using the materials on activity connection with their own family members. So it was that kind of thing that kind of kept me going.
Wonderful. And it's a good reason to keep going. I know it's not too dissimilar to our situation. I was caring for my father and pursuing medical school, and we didn't know about home care. We didn't know you could get extra help, and nor did anybody in the healthcare community ever tell us that either. And, that's how we started our company. Doug, I want to go to you because we have a lot of things in common here. I'm going to say, one of the biggest and one of the greatest for me, and I'm sure for you as well, is we both work with our mothers. My mother was a nurse, and she's now an office manager for our company. We see each other every day. We meet with each other every day. And it's more of a professional, relationship when you're in the office. But, that's, not too many people get to spend that much time with their parent day in and day out. And, sometimes it's great. Sometimes, I'm looking for another job, but no, I'm kidding. But, Doug, you're in college and your mom has this amazing big idea, but you believed it could live online. What made you say yes to building it?
A lot of it was that I knew we would run it together, that it would be our company together, that we would be able to run it in some ways independently, that Nancy had her skills that she was bringing to the company, and that I had my skills, and that we needed both of them to realize the business, essentially. That the company can't exist without the activities, and just as much as it can't exist without the website or the ability to answer somebody's email. And so that kind of gave me the ability to really go into operating the business, if that makes sense. I think that kind of goes to your question.
Yeah. when you mentioned, answering emails and things, you were answering customer emails and also phone
Right.
calls. How did that help shape your view of what this company needed to be?
For the first maybe 7 years or so, I was pretty much the individual that everybody contacted through Activity Connection. Some people would get a hold of Bob's phone number and get a hold of him that way, or his email. And so they would have some direct contact. But for many years, if somebody emailed customer service at Activity Connection or asked for an invoice or had a billing question or anything like that, it was actually me on the other end that was replying to them, unbeknownst. That's just random customer service agent. So it was me looking up their password, helping them with their billing question, helping them locate something on the website. And so it really gave me one-on-one contact with the activity director, really seeing kind of their passion for the people that they were working with and really understanding their connection with Activity Connection and the product, the ideas that Nancy was putting together for them, how kind of passionate they felt about what we were doing in a lot of ways. These people were really connected to what we were doing. Yeah, they were really involved in it. They were really excited to see what we would put out each month. And yeah, that really helped feed into the desire to keep going with it. Yeah, and to keep making a better product.
Absolutely. Well, and like you're mentioning, you're having a lot of this one-on-one interaction with the activity directors, and your mom is just a library of ideas and creativity. And did you take any of the ideas? Did that help also formulate any of the content for Activity Connection from the activity directors themselves? Do you guys get that feedback and say,
Yeah.
what we need?
Absolutely. We're always, and to this day, there's a lot of things that we've done with Activity Connection where we're constantly taking feedback from our users, improving our content. There are just untold examples of where we've tweaked, where we've come up with ideas, where there might have been a little spark from somebody who emailed us and said, "Hey, have you ever thought about this?" And that might not even be the one thing that we do, but it could start a conversation in one of our meetings that spreads to something else that 3 months later comes to a whole new page on Activity Connection. And we are constantly adding new content, constantly listening to what our users are looking for, and adding new material that way. Yeah.
And I think that speaks to the heart and passion of what Activity Connection is. It's not only great content and resources, not only for activity directors, but also for the recipients who are going to benefit from all of these activities. But you guys, your heart and soul is in it as a family. It's more than just a business where you are open to ideas. You don't shut the door. It's an open door. People have ideas, which I think is incredible. And your mom was talking about, when she kind of said, I knew this was going to work. This is going to be needed. What about for you? Was there a moment where you thought, wow, this is really much bigger than I had even expected or realized?
I don't know if there was a single moment. There's definitely the moment where I got to quit my day job. For me, that was kind of the big threshold moment. But that happened really quickly. That was within even just maybe a month of launching the paid service. I would, see the incoming commitment that people were making to our service, see the annual subscriptions that people were purchasing and the trend, and I knew that that was just kind of continuing. I would say that, getting our first office space was probably a big step for us. Yeah, but we have just been around for such a long time now with such a steady and even growth
Yeah.
that it just feels like there hasn't been any particular big surge, big moment. Like Nancy said, we started off with 300 subscribers after our first few months. And that growth line for us has just been steady and even up to this point. We have been very happy with that because that tells us that we're not really doing anything that's gimmick or trick driven, that our growth is driven by word of mouth, by quality product.
I was going to say just on quality alone. That's incredible. Nancy, go ahead, Nancy.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, we went from 300, we now have almost 20,000 facilities around the country who are members in every state, every province, I believe. And so if you were to get kind of an average of how many residents in these different communities, we serve over 1.5 million, probably 1.6 or 7 residents every month. And all of the content every month is new. And so that also kind of makes us unique. We're not an archive. People come to us because, oh, what's new? I want to find out what's new. It's part of the curiosity. It's part of the mentality activity directors have of always wanting to do something new and different.
Yeah.
And so, one other point that I wanted to make about the success of the company is the fact that we have different strokes for different folks. We have over 35 different categories. We hit on the dimensions of wellness. Everybody does that, of the physical, social, spiritual, intellectual, emotional. Besides the 5 elements of wellness, which people recognize, we recognize that people have individual personalities, individual needs, individual wants. We call them wants. I want to do arts and crafts. I just feel good when I do that. Or I love doing puzzles. Or I love reading a book. Or, I love learning things, And so that's why we have such a variety of programs on our service, and why it works so well in personal settings like home health. Because it's not just puzzles. You can find almost, I think besides maybe parties and some of the games, almost every feature on the site can be used in a single person setting. We have a very expansive, we call it Easy Does It, which is mostly for dementia, Alzheimer's. We have a special program for men. We have special programs for all of the different holidays and all the different religions. So I think different strokes for different folks, we always have to keep in mind.
That's incredible. Nancy, I was sharing with Doug that, him and I share the commonality that we both work with our mothers. What does it feel like for you as the mother working alongside Doug in helping to build Activity Connection to where it's at today?
Well, I'm always impressed. He impresses me all the time. Right now in this interview, he's impressing me because he's nailing it. And I'm going, So I've always been impressed. And from the very beginning, when I didn't even understand what connecting to the internet was, he has such a knack for explaining, Mom, just think about it as a party line, or, so he's had a really good sense of explaining things and the technology end of it, but also just an understanding of what we do, even though that's not his particular field. But he calls me Nancy in all professional meetings. But when he comes home to visit, he calls me Mom.
Then he's Mom. Yep.
He's Mom. But he's really, like I said, impressed me over the years.
Yeah. And I'm sure he would say the same about you, right, Doug?
Definitely.
And a lot of people will say, oh, that's Nancy Ewald's website. But if it weren't for Bob his seed money and him being the accountant and taking care of all of those things that we need to have taken care of. And Doug, there would be no website. So, there wouldn't have been a website without Doug and Bob and his $800 seed money.
That was a good investment, Bob, right? Before we go on to Bob, Nancy, so today it sounds like, and I believe it's still completely family ran and operated.
Go ahead.
Well, yes, we're still very actively involved in it. Doug has taken over a larger portion, and we're stepping back to some degree, but we're still definitely involved in it. Doug is the CEO of the company. But yeah, when we were talking earlier, we were saying, how do you get your ideas for the website? Many of them come from our customers, our subscribers. And one of the things that I enjoyed when I first started working full time with Activity Connection was going to many conferences and just talking to people. And one of the stories I had from that was we had something called a junk drawer detective on the website, and it was very popular. And a lady came up to me and said they actually create a physical junk drawer and go find the things that we have in our images, and say people really enjoyed walking up and seeing how many things they could find, and they also just love using the Daily Chronicle. There is one particular story, and that is a lady came up to me and said that one of her residents had died a few weeks before, and the family was in to clear out her room and so forth, and they asked her for a copy of the Daily Chronicles. And they said that they were putting a few cherished items in her casket.
Her favorite purse.
And the Daily Chronicles was one of them. That's always stayed with me.
That's absolutely.
And Bob wrote the Daily Chronicle early on. He wrote it
for years
and years. And we went to a convention and he said, well, I write that. And they asked for his autograph.
The one time in my life I've been asked for an autograph.
Oh, that's incredible.
Other than like mortgages and things like that.
Yeah. Oh, that's wonderful. Bob, Nancy had shared how originally to get the website up and things, you had loaned the $800 and you didn't really think you'd ever see that money again. You're just tossing it away to keep her busy. I think when you guys first moved to Cincinnati, if I'm correct, but obviously that was money very well spent. How did you officially transition into stepping into the company?
Well, I had a job with a large company as in the finance department and had been there for many years. And I enjoyed working with the people there, but the job itself had become so routine. It certainly didn't inspire me. And I looked over and saw what Doug and Nancy were doing, and I think I attended one or two conferences with Nancy even when I was working, and I just enjoyed the atmosphere and how worthwhile it was, how it was really helping people. And when I made the transition, at first, even though we were working long hours, it seemed like I was on vacation because I was doing different things. I had finance, but I was also writing the Daily Chronicle. We were going to various conferences and trying to get the word out and get feedback from our subscribers. And it's just much more interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. I know you guys are all very cognizant of budgets of activity directors and, trying to think, of ways to keep it affordable. Keeping Activity Connection affordable has been a true commitment from your early days. Why is that so important to you guys? Because so many others, it's all about the bottom line, but, that's not what Activity Connection's all about.
Our philosophy was no community left behind. We wanted to be affordable. We wanted for a standalone community with tight budget to still be able to afford us. And one way I look at it is our annual fee cost probably less than what it would cost to serve one meal to their residents.
Wow.
And our annual fee started off at $143.40, and right now it's $190.95. Not quite $50 increase, which seems significant, but that's over 25 years.
Right.
That's less than a $2 a year increase in our fees, and or about 1.5%.
What I'd like to kind of tie it into is essentially the price of Netflix. Like,
Oh,
Right.
right. Yeah.
we're generally cheaper than Netflix.
Right.
And, we offer hundreds of original activities, ideas, inspirations, templates, calendars, newsletters, clip art, games, puzzles, coloring pages, activities, just endless amounts of inspiration of things to do with your activities, with your residents, with your loved ones at home, everything like that, fresh, new, every month. Probably more new content than Netflix each month, and cheaper than your Netflix subscription.
Yeah.
And you can use it with all of the people in your facility. Your marketing team uses it. Your cooking staff uses it to create some of the meal planning. Your activity staff uses it. All kinds of people at the facility might use it. So the value to me just seems to be great.
Bob, the $800 we talked about a couple of times was a great decision for you. But do you have a decision that's one of your proudest moments in terms of business decisions for Activity Connection?
Well, I think that we listen to our customers, and sometimes they give us kind of a new revenue stream every once in a while. And for us, an important revenue stream has been our printing. And it started out, we offered calendars and newsletters. They were both in Word format at first. Now we have a calendar builder, if they would prefer that to a Word format. But they would do these newsletters and calendars, and would take it to Kinko's or wherever locally, but said, why don't you guys just print it? And so we started off, and for several years it was very slow. But it just gradually picked up, gradually the word got out. And now that brings in probably a quarter, maybe 20%, 25% of our revenue.
Wow.
And we're very proud of it too. We've got really nice equipment, and a person in our IT area developed software to really efficiently track the process. So that's one area, and another area is we've worked with the NCCAP, if I can get the National Certification Council for Activity Professionals, and have developed 57 CEU courses that people can come onto our site, take the course, take the test, print out a certificate of completion if they pass, and it's very affordable. We've tried to use the same philosophy of being affordable.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I want to go to you, Nancy. You'd mentioned your father earlier in the interview, and you've talked about using Activity Connections with him. What did that show you about its power and abilities in home care?
Well, a couple of things. First of all, he spent less time sleeping, less time watching TV, but I also could give him certain programs or like puzzles and stuff to do that would kind of give me a break a little bit. But also, if we had family come in or grandkids come in, I could always pull up something probably from Activity Connection he could do with them. For example, we have adult coloring pages, which kids could also color. And so he could do things with the kids. So, it was a good resource for me. it was not only good for him, it was good for me and the family,
Yes.
because I knew that I always had something available that would interest him.
Yeah.
And I think it really added to his quality of life.
Without question, without question. And I like how you mentioned that it also benefited you, because as the caregiver, you know, it gives you some respite time, but they're still engaged in meaningful activity.
Mhm.
I think one of the things that always sticks in my mind as one of the things that I'm most proud of hearing, and that's from activity directors, which really are caregivers. I mean, they're caregivers in the facility sense. They said, "You make me like my job again."
Yes.
And because it took some of the pressure off of having to prepare all these things. You make me like my job again. And so I'm hoping that with home health people, which is the ultimate person-centered care, right? That Activity Connection provides that same service, really.
Well, yeah, go ahead.
No, Bob, the company really has grown. When we first started, I wrote everything myself. Then we went to membership, and I had a few people in the industry coming in and helping me. But now you might tell them how we've grown, how many people we support, families we support, staff.
Oh,
Yeah, I did want to mention when you were saying you make me like my job again. One thing that from one of these conferences, a lady came up to me and said that she had a new executive director. And he said he wanted her to knock his socks off. He wanted stellar activities to knock his socks off, but he wanted to be out on the floor
All the time.
He wanted to be working with people. And that's where Activity Connection can help with the planning and preparation so they can be out on the floor. That's always been important to us. And we now have 23 employees,
Full time.
and we use about 15 independent contractors to help prepare the content. So it's growing, and we're really pleased. They're great people, and we're happy that they can make a living doing something they enjoy.
And they love their job. I think all of our employees are always saying how much they love what they do.
Well, I'm sure they love working for you guys. I mean, you're just good people. You know, I'm sure it's easy, and you know, they say if you love what you do, you never work a day in your life. So, you know, that helps, right?
Right, it does.
Yeah. You know, Nancy, I want to, you know, Activity Connection has been around for 30 years, give or take.
Well,
It's been around for 22 years as a paid site, and then 5 years previous to that as a free site.
So 27 years in total.
27, right.
You know, and when you launched it, you had your mission, you had your vision. I think it's fair to say you've probably realized it and more, maybe. What's the heart of your mission today, Nancy?
Well, I think we still want to grow. There are still more communities out there that can use us. We will also want to make sure that we're keeping up with the new technology. And so Doug can tell you a little bit more about some of the new things that we're developing there. But a personal project, or kind of a personal project, is something that we're starting to develop. It's called Elder Troops. It's a new program that will probably be rolling out later this year. It's not a for-profit enterprise. We're looking at it as a social organization. But Elder Troops very much organized like Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts, but these are elder troops. We wanted to call it Elder Scouts, but the Scouts wouldn't let us do that. And so we call it Elder Troops, but it's very much organized like the Scouts. So we're thinking in terms of people 65 and older who are very much feeling isolated. They might be independent in their own home, moving into a new community, or they might be living in a facility or even in a home health. And they would like to get connected to other seniors and working on projects. It'll actually be earning badges and that kind of thing. And so, yeah, it's going to be quite, I'm thinking of it almost as a legacy thing for me, because it'll be years down the road before it really gets up and going. But actually, we have a couple of people working on it who are doing a fantastic job. But the vision is that in maybe 10 years, maybe 20 years from now, that if you move into a community or you're looking around for something to get involved in and you're a senior, you go on the internet or whatever, and you say, oh, you can join Silver Sneakers, or you could join the, I don't know, Elks or Toastmasters or these kinds of things. We want elder troops to come up as an option.
That's
So that is our vision, that this would be a service. And Doug can explain more about the structure of it. It's separate from Activity Connection and not part of the revenue stream for Activity Connection. Almost a not-for-profit, but in a social sense. So that is really exciting to me.
Did you come up with this idea?
Pardon?
Did you come up with the idea?
We did. We actually had, again, an activity director who did one kind of activity similar to this. And so we said to ourselves, there's really no reason why everybody couldn't do this. And so we're developing the programs and the badges and the steps and how to earn your badges and how to connect and the whole troop structure and everything. It's going to be quite exciting, I think.
Sounds exciting.
Elder troops.
Yes.
We've got the logo, which is fantastic. We can put that up on the website or up on your thing. We can put
send us the logo. Yes, absolutely. Doug, I want to go to you. Looking back to your days in college, creating this site and looking at how far it's come, how do you keep it feeling human and not just digital?
I think a lot of that is probably just within the content. Some of that speaks to some of the design elements, some of the team that we have working on it, but a lot of it is just kind of the voice of the website. We always try to have a more personal, more direct voice where we're speaking to the activity director. That's always been kind of our market, where we're not talking to a corporate officer. We're not talking to a executive suite person. We're talking to an activity director. And I think that they can sense that when they come to our website with our content, with our visual language, a lot of things like that. I think that keeps it a very personal feeling.
Yeah, and it's a very welcoming and inviting site. Why don't you, for those that aren't watching us right now, but rather listening, and we'll have it in the show notes as well and up on the screen, but where would you like people to go to learn more about Activity Connection?
Activityconnection.com is our homepage. And from there, you can just explore. We have a lot of stuff that's behind our paid wall. Lots of new monthly content, but there is a lot that you can see that is accessible outside of our paid wall. And just explore. Go around our website. We have a forum on there where we have community members exchanging ideas and thoughts. We have a Facebook page with several thousand moderately active users where you can reach out to us, ask any questions. We have a very responsive service team that's happy to assist you with any questions that you have. We do virtual walkthroughs of our website, all kinds of opportunities to learn more about Activity Connection.
And the content is always fresh and new every month too, right?
Every month we try to, in the early days, I would have to tell people that we're essentially an online magazine that publishes. Just think of us as the same as getting a magazine in the mail every month. I would have to make that analogy, but I don't have to do that as much anymore. But if you were to actually print out our material on last count, and I haven't done the count in a little while, it was over 400 pages of content
I would say so.
every month, and probably substantially over that by now. We've essentially stopped counting.
Yeah.
And so to print it as a magazine each month, we've had customers, can you send me a printed copy each month? And, sorry, but that's not really an option. Yeah, it's a tremendous amount of material. We have a whole team of dedicated full-time staff members that are constantly creating new and amazing material every month that people would just be amazed at what they're coming up on a constant basis. We have, at this point, over 2 decades of archives of material that we're constantly trying to think of ways to revitalize, to tap into. We don't like to use a lot of it as our new material, but we know that we have fun stuff in there too. We get things that, somebody says, oh, I saw this from 2 years ago and I'd love to do this activity again. We don't want to, just because it's old doesn't mean it's not a fantastic activity. So how do we get that back out to people? These are kind of the problems that we're looking at day to day. So
it's evergreen. I mean, it is evergreen. An activity from 2 years ago is still just as relevant, but I understand, exactly what you're saying.
mm-hmm.
Another way that you can tell that people really like us, a lot of other Facebooks, community Facebooks, there's activity director Facebooks and so forth. We're featured on those many, 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 many times. And we can actually send you some examples of some of our material being done in these communities, and then they'll post stuff on their website. So that always makes us really, really proud.
Yes.
And we've been around long enough that fake holidays that Nancy has created have become essentially real holidays. I remember days that Nancy would sit back, 15 years ago and think like, what can I do on this Wednesday? I'll make this peanut butter and jelly day. And it'll be peanut butter and jelly sandwich day.
So you're why we have all these other random holidays.
And yeah, exactly. Nancy's probably responsible for 20% of them.
Yeah.
And we wouldn't put it on Activity Connection. And then a few years later, we'd start seeing peanut butter and jelly day, January something on some other random website. Like, wait a second. This was something Nancy came up with at our kitchen table. So
that is incredible. Bob, I want to go to you again real quickly. How do you keep the mission grounded as you grow?
Well, I think that always keep our customers first and foremost. The quality of the activities. Doug, we're like many companies, we're looking at AI and what that can do for us, and we have a couple of really good IT people. Doug's working with them on that mission. But one of the things that we were talking about earlier is our desire to be affordable, and we've noticed that some competitors, really push on the price. And having worked for a large company, I know why. For the large company that I worked for, they were profitable, but the goal was to be 15% more profitable year on year. And I think that really pushes our competitors. And most of them are owned by venture capital firms or investment companies. It's just us. We're here by ourselves, and if we think that profitability is okay, well, we can keep it that way. We don't need a price increase unless we're being strained financially.
Interesting. I want to kind of open this up to all three of you, and Nancy, we'll start with you. Where do you all hope that this is going in the future? Like, what is the end goal for Activity Connection?
I talked about hoping we'll grow and be around when Doug's children are grown. But Elder Scouts is the one thing that kind of it is inspiring me in the future. Also, I think that sometimes people will say, you know, what do you think is going to be the challenge of the future for this industry? And I see a big push now, and has been for a number of years now. How do we get the seniors connected? Get them on the internet, get them on the computers, get them on the kiosks, get them on the television streaming and so forth. There's a big push for them to learn technology. I think the challenge is going to be in 20 years from now, how do we get them disconnected? In other words, you can't get a hug from a computer or a kiosk, or you can't have a party or celebration with a computer. So I think in the future it might be much like we're dealing with the new the generation of the kids on the iPads and the Instagrams and all of this kind of stuff. As parents are starting to be concerned, they're spending too much time and not enough time interacting personally. So I think that is going to be the challenge 20 years from now.
Yeah.
And hopefully we'll be around to show them how to do that with Elder Scouts and all of our programs.
And no doubt you will be, Nancy.
Elder troops, excuse me, elder troops. I can't say scouts.
Yeah, we don't want to.
We can't say scouts. We
can't say
elder
scouts.
troops.
How about for you, Doug?
For the future of activity connection, Elder Troops is an important social arm of activity connection that I see. It is going to, as we envision, really help connect a lot of seniors, and I see it just a lot of fun.
Yeah.
When we talk about it to people within our company, everybody just kind of lights up and gets excited about things. So that right there is a sign that we're kind of onto something pretty good there, I think. With activity connection, I feel like where we are going is a positive direction. We have a strong focus on our core activity creation that we've been good at. Our focus will be in maintaining Nancy's message that she has worked so hard to instill with our core development team, in her vision of how activities should be structured, how they should be built, what the value of activities are, making sure that that's carried on through the future of activity connection. And then also developing the right technology products. We were kind of at the forefront with websites. We were at the forefront with subscription services. We were at the forefront in the industry, at least, with e-learning technologies with our online courses. I don't claim that we're at the forefront of any kind of technology, but identifying where the industry is going from here. And I think that we've identified some areas that are really key, that we can help activity directors do their job, where we can help seniors that are living at home use activity connection, experience some of the great material that is produced on activity connection at home, and expand our technology so that we can just help the activity director do their job easier, do their job so that they can focus on the fun parts, like Nancy says. We want to take the legwork out of it. That's always kind of been our core mission in the background, is we'll hire the people to build out these things, to do the research online, to make sure the facts are right, to build out the pages, the coloring stuff, the puzzles, the conversation points, the discussion topics, all of that stuff, to give you the packet for whichever holiday you're celebrating today that you have no knowledge of, maybe that you have one resident that celebrates that holiday. And so you got to learn about it.
Yeah.
And so you can go to Activity Connection and download a packet about that holiday that's got some information, that's got some activities to run. And you can go into that resident's room with confidence, knowing that you can do this. And that's always been really important to Activity Connection. So just continuing that value and that mission.
That's wonderful. And how about for you, Bob?
I really have to agree with Nancy and Doug that we want to continue to have a quality product. We want to be, one of our slogans in the past is Activity Connection is your activity assistant.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's an important tool for activity professionals so that they can get the quality and quantity that they need and be able to provide for a wide variety of interests. One of the things that when we attend state conferences, every time we attend, somebody would come up and say, "Oh, we use you." And I said, "Oh, okay. You know, what do you think of our travel log?" And I said, "Oh, I haven't done that one."
Mm-hmm.
Or what do you think of this over here? "Oh, I haven't done that. I use 7 or 8 pages every month." And I said, "Well, you know, look at these other things. We do have a coloring page for adults. We do have our easy does it activities for people with dementia." And so it's the breadth of the website that I think a lot of people miss.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they find several pages they like, so that's what they hit month after month.
And they
may be with us for 5 or 10 years. They don't know about the other pages. So that's one of the things our challenge is then get them to try everything.
Right. Mm-hmm.
You know, I just want to say personally how much I appreciate you guys and, you know, the true integrity and quality that you bring into this industry and this whole sector for our seniors and, you know, those that are in their homes. Because like you said, Nancy, you know, technology doesn't replace that, you know, that component and that engagement. You know,
Right.
Doug, you mentioned how it helps activity directors have fun again. You know, we've dealt with countless activity directors here in Michigan. And, you know, one of the things they appreciated about us so much, one, we're coming in an altruistic way and doing these activities for them where they can sit back and kind of participate and enjoy it. But, you know, you're giving them, you know, the ability to have fun again, take a little bit less off their plate. And, you know, I just think that's so vitally important because I just feel like in a lot of these communities, the activity directors are an afterthought where everyone else is the first thought. So I think you guys are shining an important light on the work that they do and the needed value that they bring to these residents. You know, and Nancy, I want to kind of close with you today. If you could say one thing to a family caregiver who's watching this or maybe listening to it, and maybe they feel exhausted or they feel isolated and alone, because I know we talk to hundreds of family caregivers in our company, and that's one of the biggest things. They feel like nobody else understands what they're going through. They feel isolated. You know, what would you want to tell them today?
Well, I know it's difficult. It's difficult, especially if you know it's a family member that you're taking care of and not just part of a home health service. It's difficult. I do think though, reaching out and finding tools like Activity Connection or community services and those kinds of things that can support you would be the recommendation that I give people in there. And I think you have to say thank you. Thank you for all you do. It's a very difficult job and very demanding.
Yes, it is.
And we appreciate what they do.
Thank you. We appreciate what you guys do. So from Nancy, Bob, and Doug Ewald, the family and team behind Activity Connection, thank you guys so much for what you're doing and for taking time to join us today.
It was great chatting with you.
Thank you, Lance.
Our pleasure.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us again here at All Home Care Matters. All Home Care Matters is here to help families as they navigate these long-term care issues. We invite you to visit us at allhomecarematters.com, where there's a private, secure, fillable form where you can give us feedback, show ideas, or if you have questions. Every form is read and responded to. And remember, you can listen to the show on any of your favorite podcast streaming platforms or watch the show on our official YouTube channel. Just make sure that you hit that subscribe button so that you never miss an episode. I'd also like to say thank you again to Nancy, Doug, and Bob Ewald from Activity Connection for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you again here at All Home Care Matters.
Thank you for joining us today. We look forward to you joining us again on another episode of All Home Care Matters. To learn more about the show and to connect with us, visit us at allhomecarematters.com.